takes a few seconds connecting. Hi, welcome to this afternoon's presentation for me. The title of this is Standards, the latest development in American and international standards. As you can see, we have a panel of 5 eminent people. Elena Brandt is the Assistant Professor of Professional Practice in Translation and Localization Management Program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey. She's also the Membership Secretary of ASTM International Technical Committee F43 on Languages, Services and Products, and she serves as a director on the board of the American Translators Association. Alan Melby is the Vice President of FIT, the International Federation of Translators. Started out by working on a machine translation project in 1970, but switched to building productivity tools for human translators in the 1980s and became a French to English translator certified by the ATA. Dr. Bill Rivers is a principal at WP Rivers and Associates, and he's a veteran language industry lobbyist and standards expert. Giovanna Carriero Contreras is the founder and CEO at Sesco Linguistic Services, an LSP in the Denver area. And in addition, she is a member of the US delegation to ISO, the International Organization for Standardization for Interpreting. And Kathleen Diamond is the chair of the ASTM Technical Committee F43 on Language Services and Products. She's been actively involved in advocating for the professionalization of the language services industry since she founded her language services company, LLE, in 1979. So, as I said, a wonderful team to tell us about the standards, and I know it's something that my company is struggling with all the time. So, with that, over to you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Dave, and I'd like to thank .sub for its kind sponsorship, and to all the sponsors of Gala Connected Bounce Forward. In our backstage, we had a bit of a chat with Allison Furch, and it's our understanding that if everything goes right, we'll all be in San Diego next spring, and very much looking forward to seeing people in person. And I'd like to thank everyone who signed in and is listening to this session. We're going to try to make this concrete and useful. Sometimes people get this thing about standards, like that's for those really, big brains out there. Not that I have a big brain, but everyone else on this panel does, or people who really like to dive deep into abstruse and complex topics. And what does it have to do with me? And we want to make this, particularize this, make this relevant to what you're doing in your situation, your companies. And also with the understanding that a number of these standards are in very wide use, and we don't even realize it sometimes. And that's, of course, we'll cover that when we get to some of the ISO standards. I'm going to try to share my screen. We'll see how this goes. I'm relatively new to this platform, which is no excuse for technical inaptitude. And here we go. And our PowerPoint slideshow. And if one of the other panelists could let me know if they see that.
We do.
Okay, excellent. So standards, latest developments, right? And we'll move forward. Okay, this is not cooperating, is it? There we go. Gala Connected Bounce Forward. So the first topic we wanted to cover is ASTM International Technical Committee F43 on Language Services and Products. And as some of you know, I'm the founding and immediate past chair, very mercifully term limited, I think, for me and for everyone else. And we also have Kathleen Diamond, who is the current chair of ASTM F43, and very happy with her leadership and to serve with her. And I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to start this this presentation on ASTM.
Thank you so much, Bill Rivers, and good afternoon, Gala. This is it's such a bittersweet experience to be sitting in my little office home in Winchester, Virginia, instead of being in exotic places with you. I was really looking forward to Dublin myself, being a bit of an Irish girl, but here we are. So we'll make the most of it. If you'll please give me the next slide, Bill. So I'm standing in the large shoes of Bill Rivers as the first chair of the ASTM Committee F43 on Language Services and Products. And as sort of only the second chair of our existence, I'm kind of always wanting to at least give you all a sense of what the heck is ASTM anyway. And I love this image because it helped me to focus in on what the heck standards were all about. ASTM International was founded back in 1898 by engineers and chemists. And it is the largest US-based international voluntary consensus standards writing organization, independent private sector, not-for-profit, and it has a mission to provide a system for experts worldwide to directly participate in developing market-relevant, high-quality international standards. And the image of the train is what's important, because the trains were laid across America, but the problem was they started going and they were finding there were different size standards at different parts of the country. So they got together, they said, we got to correct this, let's have some standards. These things have got to have the same size across the country. Thank you so much, Bill. Next. So next question is, well, why was F43 formed? Language Services and Products. It goes back to our origins as standards interested parties back in the mid 1980s, when some of us were having trouble with proclamations, speak Spanish like a native in 6 weeks, when we knew that was an impossibility. So we came together in Washington, D.C. with a group, and Bill Rivers was one of them, as was Karen Decker, photographed here. Karen was the first chair of the first committee on foreign language instruction. We tucked in under consumer reports in the beginning, but we became F43 in 2010. And we feel that it's significant. We did it because, well, first of all, there was a rapid expansion in the language services industry, which didn't even exist. Demand, of course, for our services, increased development and provision of services and products, translation, localization, interpreting, MT, all this good stuff that you'll be hearing more about this afternoon. And of course, recognition that there was a need for consensus standards by U.S. government and other buyers. Next slide, please. So how, it was a very exciting time because, as many of you perhaps know very well, many people in the United States, at least, are monolingual and don't really have any concept of what it means to have a language services industry. So how does ASTM F43 in particular relate to the industry? Well, first of all, you got to know something about the industry. We're talking 56.2 billion, give or take a billion here or there, or $500 million a year in revenues, with a 7.7 average annual growth rate. We have, it's comprised of 250 educated, highly skilled specialists. And many of them are small businesses, some very, very large businesses. It's an industry that matters to the entire economy. It's a national security and social services. You can't do healthcare in America without having a language services industry. We have a couple of very important legislative acts that have helped us along. The Title VI of the Civil Rights Act requires it's mandated that access be available to those who need it. And, it's other government agencies, as you can see here on the slide. I won't take time to read every word. Next slide, please, Bill. Okay, so what's our structure? From the time we migrated from being under consumer products, we began to create our own structure of standing standards. And they include interpreting, foreign language instruction, translation, testing, language services companies. That was an incredible breakthrough. And we may be the only one in the ASTM family of standards that actually has a standards for the company that manage and control the products the services that we sell. Captioning, brand new. I'll talk about that in a minute. We have an executive committee. We have terminology, which is very exciting and something I think also somewhat unique to us. And then, of course, we are very related to ISO, and you'll be hearing more about the ISO standards from subsequent speakers. But just so that you see, it's tucked into the F43 structure. So we have a tag for education and learning services and language terminology, and we are very much involved with what's going on overseas. Next slide, please, Bill. So I was asked to speak primarily today, which is why I've been speaking rather rapidly. I'm not sure how my time is going, but I was asked to speak today on what's new. And I'm very, very proud to say that this is a committee that is so vibrant and so alive and following the rhythm and the excitement of this industry itself. So under interpreting, we have the revision, we have the standard practice. This one is being currently revised. Under translation, you'll be hearing about some of these, excuse me, from next speakers, but we have the quality standard for translation. It's being revised. And then we have a proposed new practice for analytic evaluation of translation quality and another proposed standard for holistic quality evaluation system for translation. Talk about vibrancy. It's amazing to me. Next slide, please. Okay. What else is on the burner? Well, under language testing, we have our existing standard and a brand new one, a new guide for testing, interpreting performance. And that one is under balloting as we speak. And that will be a brand new standard in our list of standards. And then we have a brand new standing committee for captioning. And this was just formed and is just beginning to go to work under its work group called captioning. I think I have another slide, Bill. Okay, so who can participate quickly? A little membership drive here for Elena. Anybody can be a member of ASTM International. Annual dues for an individual are $75, for an organization $400. We're looking for people, particularly people who are buyers of language services, because we have to have a balance. So we meet every 6 months, and we welcome everybody at Gala and anybody else on this call to join ASTM. And I think I still have another slide, Bill. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much. I hope that you were able to have some idea about ASTM F43 language services and products. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Elena Brantz. I'm over here in Monterey, California. I too would have liked to attend this conference in person, but it's great to be here with you all virtually. It's nice that we can connect from just so many different places in the world. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about 7 things that your language company can do with standards. How can you actually apply standards within the workplace? And these slides that I'll share, these tips are based upon an article that I wrote for the Translation Company Division, the newsletter of that division of the American Translators Association. Could I get the next slide, please? All right, so you've got the first 4 ways that your company can use standards right here on this slide. And we will start with the very first item, writing the commercial terms and conditions that govern the subcontracting of work based upon Annex B, agreements and project specifications of ISO 17100. So David Hubel is somebody that does ISO 17100 certifications. He's out of Orion Assessment Services. And he recently came and joined our vendor management class at MIS, the class I teach on vendor management at MIS. And something that he noted was that while Annex B of ISO 17100 is in the annex, so that would make it an optional portion of the recommendations within the standard, the information within is super important and should be taken into account when writing terms and conditions. That annex goes through the kinds of things that you will want to cover in your terms and conditions if you're a company, an LSP that's getting started with, if you're a startup or something like that. And those things should include things like making sure that you're indicating who owns all of this content, what happens if content is, accidentally leaked or something like that. What's super important about about terms and conditions too is determining who owns translation memory content. That's something that's not often attended to in terms and conditions. And then something we've just talked about in my project management classes at MIS is the fact too that terms and conditions just routinely sort of take moral rights from translators over the content that they're translating. So just take a look at the Annex B of ISO 17100. Take a look at all of ISO 17100. It's not a perfect standard because it needs to be broad enough to cover the international market, but it does have really great advice within, such as what are the professional competencies of translators and what are the professional qualifications that make a professional translator as well. Okay, so I see we got a lost connection, but that's okay because I had essentially the 4 items on my slides. So the second one was to design your project planning processes and project specifications based upon ISO 11669, based upon also ASTM F2575. So according to standards of best practice, quality in translation, quality in localization, it's subjective. The only way that you can define quality in translation and localization is by saying, okay, did we set requirements up for ourselves at the beginning of the project in specification forms? And then at the end of the project, you take a look at the requirements you set up for yourself, the goals that you wanted to achieve with the project. And essentially, if you met those goals, then you've achieved quality in translation. For example, if I'm a company like eBay, where I have a great deal of content that is user generated, my specifications might say that for this type of content that's user generated, there's such a great volume of it. The specification that I'm going to set is that we are going to machine translate this with light post editing. So then if that product meets the needs of the users, if it's getting out in a timely fashion at good enough quality, that means that you've delivered a quality product. By the same token, if you have content that needs to be handled much more, it needs to be a much higher quality marketing content, things like that, then you would go through a longer production chain based on your specifications to deliver that higher level of polishing. And so long as you're meeting your specifications, you're doing what you set out to do in your localization projects, you're achieving quality in translation. But first you have to define what are the objectives that we want to reach. Number 3, when contracting with LSCs, require ASTM F313018 compliance, if not certification. This is a new certification within the American National Standards market. Essentially, this F313018 standard lays out what are the criteria that make a language service company. So right here, we're differentiating. There's so many LSPs on the market. In fact, Dr. Rivers gave a talk at MIS not too long ago where he noted that there's 6,000 to 8,000 LSPs within the language services industry. So among those LSPs, you often have companies that are just, it sounds like an LSP is much bigger than it actually is from the marketing. We do this, we work in every language, when really it's a single person or a handful of people that aren't actually a company. So if you require this 3130 certification when outsourcing to companies, that's a way to know that you're actually working with a company that's got the infrastructure in place to keep your information protected, to their, have vendor management processes, et cetera, et cetera. Speaking of data security, you've got Annex A of ISO 27001. This was when I set up an LSP myself, I ran through the Annex A of that information technology standard just to map out my entire data structure. How am I housing data? Where is data coming into my system? Where is it going out? Where are weaknesses within my system where hackers might be able to get access to all of this confidential information that my clients are trusting me with? So that ISO 27001 standard is going to give you a guideline, a path to follow when going through and systematically checking your systems for data security. Can I get the next slide, please? So there's three more items. For the number 5, develop contractors' understanding of your LSP's quality expectations through methodologies outlined in standards. I'm going to leave Dr. Alan Melby to talk much more about that. He'll be addressing the MQM standard and the HQuest standard. These are 2 complementary standards that allow you to teach quality expectations to the translators that you work with. One thing I would say there is that translators, errors in translation are completely subjective. So you should expect to have to train and teach the translators that you work with what is an error to you. You need a period of acclimation with your vendors in order for them to understand your quality expectations. In terms of advocating for quality language access, there's that circular that you saw in Kathleen's slides, A-119, that encourages government agencies to use consensus-based standards like those developed by ASTM F43 and ISO TC37 rather than working from scratch. There's a lot of, I think, so just when anecdotally in our meetings, we sometimes hear, for instance, that interpreters will have much more impact in their client education when in the court system. If they're not just saying, hey, I, the individual interpreter, think that this is the way that this needs to be run for me to produce a quality product, but if there's this standard that's been developed by a group of 100 people having a look at it, making sure that it covers everything, that's something that's much more impactful. Something that you can use to back up your word when you're advocating for the things that you need to produce quality translation and localization services. And then finally, how else can you use standards? You can use standards by joining ASTM F43. Kathleen gave a pitch for joining ASTM F43. I'll give a pitch for joining ASTM F43 as well. We would love to have your participation. Participating in this group gives you the opportunity to keep up to date on the state of the art of our industry, to work alongside a bunch of individuals who are really passionate about language access and quality and translation and localization, who really think hard about this sort of stuff. And we would love to have you join us in this endeavor, in this pursuit of standardizing the language services industry. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alana, and thank you, Gia, for jumping in. I'm back again. My internet cut out, but Gia is going to drive the slides. Can you drive and talk at the same time, Gia? All right, because I work with really smart people. So Giovanna Carriero Contreras, the chair of the U.S. TAG Technical Advisory Group to ISO Technical Committee 37 Language and Terminology Subcommittee 5, translation, interpretation, and related technologies. Gia, you're up.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining from. I live in Colorado, but I am now streaming from Jackson Hole in Wyoming, and it's beautiful out here. So thank you for having us. I would like to leave these slides up for a few seconds. These are the further resources that Alina was also referring to. So you have it here on the recording for your own benefit. And the latest from ISO. So before I go into the list of our working groups, the ISO Technical Committee 37 is a technical committee within the International Organization for Standardization. And this particular technical committee prepares standards and other documents concerning methodology and principles for terminology and language resources. So the name of the technical committee is Terminology and Other Language and Content Resources. Within the technical committee 37, then I work within the subcommittee 5. So the technical committee has a 5 subcommittee. I work in the one that is related to translation, interpreting, and related technology. The scope is the standardization in the field of translation in the working group 1, interpreting working group 2, as well as translation and interpreted related technology, technical writing, content management, localization, globalization, internationalization. And the work group number 3 is specifically referring to equipment and technologies. And now there is the newly created work group 4 for a standard that is in progress for training and educational standards. Now, in this specific subcommittee, there are 17 published ISO standards. There are 7 that are under development. We have 36 active participating members and 12 observing members. The observing members do not have a right to vote, while the 36 participating members meet and vote and discuss on the standards at hand. One thing that I would like to bring up that is different from the way ASTM operates, that we feel that we keep much in consideration, is the fact that we do have to, when we contribute to these meetings and the creation and development of these standards, we need to consider the legislations of each country and the market needs of each country. So the proposing and of a new standard is very much is stemming out of the market analysis that we have to do in order to propose it as a viable standard to work on. So I'm going to give some more details about some of the standards. What you see listed on the screen are all translation-related standards, and these are already published. So there is a lot of work that has already been done. A general guidance on translation services, requirements for translation services. You have also the amendment that goes with it, and those really go back to 2012, 15, 17. And then we have a more recent 16, 17, that are related to the equipment, the requirements for simultaneous interpreting via equipment. We have translation services for post-editing and machine translation. And we also have the standard on XLife, if I am pronouncing correctly. Now, if we move on to the group number, to working group number 2, these are all those that are related to interpreting services. The first 4 are in regard to standards on community interpreting services, general interpreting services, and the newly adopted legal and healthcare interpreting standards. The one that you see right at the bottom has to do with the terminology. So in 2019, a full deployed standard was developed around terminology so that we in SC5 could use a standardized nomenclature and terminology for the content that we were referring to. It's a work in progress because obviously the newly adopted definitions start with the standards that were either in progress or published starting in 2019. So this is also a type of work that we do it retroactively to make sure that the newly adopted definitions appear consistently across the board in SC5. Now in working group 3, the published standard is related to the simultaneous interpreting permanent booth and requirement. And then we have the one related to mobile booths and also to equipment in general. Two of these standards are currently under review. I made a list that goes back over 5 years, but the standard process in ISO standards come up for review every 5 years, at which point there is a call out to the participating members to see if the review of these standards is needed. And once there is a consensus and they're voted on the review, then we proceed with the systematic review process to update that standard according to new market needs. So at the moment, the standards under development are the translation services is the evaluation of translation output, and maybe Alan can give a word more on these, the general guidance for translation projects. As you remember, those are the ones that were particularly published in earlier on at the beginning of 2012, 2015. Then we are also moving forward with the group consultation to approve the review of the guidelines for community interpreting and also for community interpreting. Then we are working on the final phases of the conference interpreting standard, conference interpreting requirements and recommendations, as well as I just said, a newly working group, number 4, was formed, and that is the one where we're working on requirements for interpreters, educators, and teaching training programs. The simultaneous interpreting delivery platforms was published right before COVID as a PAS and is now worked on as a standard, and that is in final phases. The ones that are currently under systematic review are the simultaneous interpreting technologies related to permanent booths and mobile booth. So here is where I hand it off to Alan, but what I would like to point out is just a very short anecdote about me and why I joined both ASTM and ISO as a professional in the field, but also as the head of a language service provider. I believe that there is a lot of work to do in raising the bar of our profession, even though we have we represent a big slice in the global economy, we still have a lot of work to do to affirm the professionalization of our services. And depending on where we live, it's more or less felt. So I do invite each one of you to participate in whatever effort, either in the country where you reside and work, or for the ASTM, that is an international organization that you can join anytime, because we do need input from the field, from the markets, to also make sure that we bring up new needs or needs for new standards for an evolving and dynamic reality. So as of recently, we try to stir the interest or to have approval for a standard on remote interpreting. However, not everybody was sharing the need for such standards. we are going to, so we were not successful in passing this with the ISO, and we are proposing this to happen in ASTM F43. So the input from the field, whether you are an individual, whether you're working with a language service provider, to provide continuous feedback with the organization that represents your country and the industry at the ASTM level and ISO level, reveals to be extremely important when we need to provide input based on market needs and feedback. So with this, I think I'm gonna hand it over to Bill. You are muted, maybe?
We can see your lips moving, Bill, but no sounds coming out.
So I am gonna try to read your lips, and most importantly, I'm gonna try to read your mind by saying that you would like to thank me for what I went over, and you are going to pass it on our wonderful colleague, Alan Melby.
Very impressive.
Alan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So who has control over the slides at this point?
I do. Please go on.
Thank you. Well, I was preparing a presentation to describe in more detail the translation quality standards in ISO and ASTM International, or ASTM for short. But then very recently I read an interesting article in the current issue of Multilingual Magazine by Tucker Johnson, where he makes some interesting claims. And I thought, well, I'll throw everything I'd prepared, I threw it out and started over yesterday. So let's go on to the next slide. Tucker says, and I quote, "There is an impending disruption of industry standard quality management systems." Sounds ominous, doesn't it? And then he says, they have to go. Wow. So I thought, okay, I better read this carefully. And he said, and the main reason they have to go, he points out, is that they are implemented without any input whatsoever from the end users. I thought, that's terrible. How did that happen? And so let's try to analyze what he's talking about. Next slide, please, Gia. How did we get into this mess? Well, if we are in this mess, let's just, for the sake of discussion, say yes, there are industry standards that need to, quality management standards that need to be discarded. If that's the case, then Tucker would be giving us a description of them. And here's what he says. He says, well, there's a trend from metaphrase to paraphrase. Well, that's a clue, because metaphrase and paraphrase are terms from translation studies that are from the late 1600s. If you study the history of translation, you'll see that Dryden became quite famous by talking about those. Metaphrase was a literal translation, just practically word for word. Well, who does that? Nobody I know. And paraphrase was a very liberal translation, a very free translation. And the key aspect of metaphrase and paraphrase is that that's the only contrast. There's nothing about the end user. Well, of course, that's a problem. However, it's a problem because the translation industry, or those parts of the translation industry that are still talking about metaphrase and paraphrase, didn't get the memo about functionalism in translation. Now, functionalism started out in the latter part of the previous century, the late 1900s, in Germany, and we could talk about the pioneers of it, but it's an interesting confluence of an aspect of translation studies that is focused on the end user, the audience, the intended audience, and is in opposition to the metaphrase paraphrase approach from centuries ago. And it has taken over in translation studies, and it has the advantage of having taken over in many parts of the translation industry as well, the profession and the industry, because it makes total sense. You've got to take into account the end user. So the translation quality management systems that Tucker is talking about, they didn't get the memo about functionalism. What else contributed to this mess? Let's look at part 2. Next slide, please. The second part is that there's been a revolution in quality management. Now, many people have heard of Deming, famous figure in quality management, heard about what happened with the Japanese automobile industry, where seemingly all of a sudden, it wasn't overnight, but it seemed like overnight, their cars were getting so much better, people were preferring them over cars coming out of Detroit in the United States. And suddenly, the US automobile industry took notice, said, what's going on here? Well, it was an American over there teaching the Japanese how to do quality management. And they said, oh, we got to get with the program. And they did. And it made a huge difference. And it's made a difference in many industries in the United States. Well, these poor people that Tucker is talking about, they didn't get this memo either. They obviously haven't heard about modern quality management. Yikes. So, but ISO, fortunately, has heard about it and has developed over the years the ISO 9000 series of standards that implement the core concepts and principles of this revolution in quality management. Now, it's very important how quality is defined in ISO 9000. It's the degree to which a set of inherent characteristics of an object, a service, whatever, fulfills requirements. And those requirements, what are they? Well, they're the requirements based on the needs of the end user. So the end user is coming to the fore, not only in translation, replacing the old approach, but also in quality management. Let's go on. To the next slide. So how do we get out of this mess that Tucker is talking about? Those aspects of the translation industry that are stuck in, well, kind of stuck in the 1600s, a little bit out of date, should we say, stuck in the 1800s, at least in the 1800s, before the revolution in translation studies and the revolution in quality management. How do we get out of this problem? What do we do? How do we help these people get out of this mire they're stuck in? Well, the answer is standards. Because fortunately, the forthcoming standards on quality, translation quality in ISO and ASTM are based not on those old-fashioned, obsolete views from the 1800s, but from the modern views of functionalism and modern quality management. Hooray! So that's the answer. The answer, who would have thought? The answer is standards. So we need to help helped get these standards out, finished, published, and implemented. These standards have the ISO 5060 and the ASTM standard based on MQM, multidimensional quality metrics for translation quality evaluation. They have several things in common. One is that they very much are customer-centric, which is what Tucker is pleading for. He's going to get what he's been asking for, and I'm hope when I'm able to sit down, I hope very soon, and sit down with Tucker and say, Tucker, this is what you've been dreaming about. It's here. It's on the doorstep. They take end user needs into account, make them into requirements, and then the requirements are expressed as translation specifications. And as Elena mentioned at the beginning, several of our existing standards are very much focused on how to convert these requirements into specifications using standard translation parameters. Then you have quality metrics. Each translation quality metric is based on a set of specifications. You say, each translation quality metric? Isn't there just one? Well, no, that's totally obsolete. The notion that translation quality is absolute, that you don't need to take into account the audience, that's 1600 stuff. Now we think of translation quality metrics as based on especially intended audience and purpose. Now, there's still something to resolve. Final slide. The Tucker says something rather provocative. I hope that a number of people listening would think of this as provocative. He says, mistakes are not important. Customers are important. Now, what does he mean by that? What could he possibly mean? Mistakes are not important. Of course, mistakes are important. If you have a label on a prescription and the translation says take three pills twice a day, and the original said take one pill once a day, we might have some problems here. Well, mistakes are important. Of course they are. But Tucker is trying to make a point. So now I haven't spoken with him in the last couple of days since I read his article, but here's what I think he means by this enigmatic pair of sentences. I think he means that we need to do validation. Validation is a core principle of modern quality management. And what is validation? This very specific sense. It's where you say, okay, how does the quality, the metric and the customer, how do they fit together? You say, well, first of all, you talk about the customer experience, and you have to separate out those aspects of the customer experience that are based on the translation, and the aspects of the translation and those that are based on other entirely extraneous factors. That's not easy. But once you've separated out, then you say, well, if the translation quality metric says this translation is better than this one, significantly better than this one, does the better translation, according to the metric, produce a better customer experience, a more satisfying customer experience? If so, great, then there's this correlation, and the metric is predicting customer experience. If not, then you don't say, oh, customer, you don't know what you want. The metric says the translation is good, therefore you should be happy. No, that's not what quality management says, not modern quality management. It says you don't fix the customer, you fix the metric. You go back and you say, well, let's revise the metric, go back to the specifications, do what you need to do, the well-developed principles, and come up with a new metric which predicts customer satisfaction. Then you've made peace. And then the mistakes that Tucker's talking about are these mistakes tied to the old translation approach to translation. But now there's no more need to distinguish. The mistakes according to a validated or valid translation metric are relevant to the customer experience. And we've made peace and we've resolved the issue. And thank you, Tucker, for setting the stage for the new standards.
So it looks like Bill's mic is still not working. I'm just going to jump in really quickly and say that we're noticing and just looking through the attendees for this session, and we're noticing several client-side organizations too that are in the audience here. It would be so wonderful to have your participation in ASTM F43. We have one of our key principles within ASTM F43 is a principle of balance, where our standards are only as good as the variety of people that are contributing to them. And so the more organizations that we can get involved with this, the more different kinds of production environments that are taking a look at our standards and making sure that they account for just the reality on the ground in production environments is super important. So please, reach out to any one of us. We would be so happy to work with you on either American national or international standards. And anyone from around the world can join in on the American national standards. Maybe you're thinking that I'm not located in the United States, so I wouldn't be able to get involved with ASTM F43. But in fact, you probably do want to get involved with ASTM F43, given how much the US market influences the international market too. So please do consider getting involved and having an influence on the market that we're all participating in.
Elena, if I can join you, I'm so thankful that you took this opportunity to reach out. ASTM, we can't have a standard without the balance. We've got to have users and producers and general interest. And so it's not only will you have you will influence the way the standard is written without having to do much work. You just get a chance to just comment and put your thoughts in at the time of ballot. And the subcommittee, the working group, has to come back and revise until it meets some sort of a collaboration with you, the end user, the buyer of language services. So please join us. It's easy.
Okay. I don't think we're going to hear from Bill. We can we can see him, but we can't hear him. There aren't any questions in the Q&A section at the moment, but I've got one. As a representative of a medium-sized LSP, I was watching the first part of the presentation, and I was overwhelmed by numbers, letters, all those things. How do I find out what is the right thing for me as a medium-sized organization to do? I mean, you can say, oh, you need to be certified in ISO this and ASTM that, and I say I can't afford it, not necessarily in terms of money, but in terms of resources. How do I work out the way to start and how to grow and become the standards-based organization I think we all realize that we want to be?
Gio, do you want to take it first and I'll elaborate?
Absolutely. So, Dave, I give you an answer, a small business to medium business, I think we navigate the same constraints, right? And so my first answer is to get involved. And the reason why I say that is because by being involved, you or anyone from your team, you have direct pulse on what is at work. The second thing that I can say is to assess what the priorities are in your business. What are the services that you are pursuing the most, and see what are the ones that refer or have reference standards that can give you the best framework for you to comply with. And I think that the compliance is the first step before certification. Buying the standards and assessing the standards, reviewing the standards with your team will give you ability to create or to notice check and balances within your own organization and see where you can efficiently make changes if need be. Then you decide what are the standards that you may eventually get certified against. This is really something that we at ISO keep in mind, in the sense of how do we make it such that we don't have to burden our language service providers so that they feel that they have to buy every single standard, right? Or comply or certify against every single standard. And so, one, review them. And the title is pretty much self-explanatory. So you know where your services are geared. And those are the ones that you can reach out to. Reach out to colleagues. Now you have these way in, so that there is a friend that can introduce you to the to navigate, because it's not easy to navigate ASTM and ISO. And so take advantage from colleagues. We wish we can, and that's why we invite individuals and professionals and LSPs and end users to be part of this circle, because it's a community of stakeholders. And if we do not align, if we do not align the needs of those that needs the services, those that provide the services, those that create the services, look at what happens throughout COVID, we are not going to be able to create a solid response for what is needed in the market. I hope I gave you ideas, but Kathleen, please fill the gaps.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment. You said that you are a language service provider, language service. I don't know whether you're a company or not, but at ASTM F43, we have a wonderful partnership where we offer to ALC, the Association of Language Companies, a discount for the certification process through the Orion organization. So you get your company, it's audited rigorously, and then it's certified to the ASTM standard 3130-18. So that's a huge benefit if you're a company. So please consider it. And otherwise, as Joanna says, get yourself involved, start learning, start reading, pick the standards that most are relevant to what the service that you're working with and you're providing to the end market, if that's relevant. You don't have to do them all. Pick the ones that are most relevant to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. In the meantime, we do have a question in the Q&A tab now. Oh, there it is. If one of your team, apart from Bill, would like to take a stab at answering this, that would be great.
Alan?
This is a great question. So if translation quality, it's based on customer satisfaction, wouldn't there be a concern with the standards constantly changing? Well, what's intriguing about the way that translation quality standards are approached in ASTM and ISO is that you starting with the specifications for, how are we going to satisfy this customer? Well, we need to meet the specifications. Well, the specifications vary widely, but the parameters don't. So you have the translation parameters, which are standard, and then the specifications that vary. But what you have in common is the questions. The parameters are the questions. The specifications are the answers for this particular customer. So it gives some stability. I've watched these translation parameters since a big group of us, over 100 people, developed them a number of years ago. With all the evolution in the industry, we have not had to do much fiddling with the parameters. The questions remain the same. The answers depend on the customer. The other thing is that the translation error types For a metric, you draw on a standard inventory of error types. The metric varies according to the specifications, but you have that comfort of saying, well, we can talk to each other about these metrics because they're all based on the same typology of error types. So it's a stable framework. Now, I don't know if that helps you. That helps me deal with this question of variation. Whoever
Okay.
asked that question, what does it mean to you?
All right, Alan, thank you very much. We've got one quick question. We're almost out of time. It says, are there localized UI and locale handling standards that apply to the client side? I don't know if anyone has a quick answer to that, but the hour is up. And does anyone have a quick answer to that?
Unicode Consortium puts out the common locale. It's a repository of locale information about a whole bunch of languages, and it's all in one place. I don't know if that would be helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all. That hour went significantly more quickly than I expected it to. I've learned a lot. You'll be seeing some accesses of your website from me in the next couple of days, and thank you very much. And I'm sure everybody. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for this graphic. Who did this? This is great.
And I'm sure everybody will be around in the networking session. So if you have any other more specific questions, please find the panelists, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to talk to you. So with that, thank you very much, and see you at the networking session.